I met Maribel in the fall of 2007 under the fluorescent buzz of a late-night grocery store. I was holding a frozen pizza and she was staring blankly at a row of herbal teas like she was searching for a flavor that didn't exist. I made some offhand joke about decision fatigue in aisle 3 and to my surprise, she laughed, not politely but genuinely. That kind of unguarded laugh that makes your stomach flutter like you've dropped from a great height. That was how we started. Not fireworks. Not drama. Just something soft. Something calm. That calm became our rhythm. We dated quietly, married quietly, and even bought our house in a neighborhood that felt like a sigh. Quiet lawns, muted colors, retired neighbors who waved from porches. We were never loud people. We were steady. But something happens when life gets too quiet. You stop noticing the silences that matter. The ones that carry weight. At first, it was little things. Maribel stopped humming when she folded laundry. That was the first silence I remember. Then she started staying late at work, not every day, just sometimes, then more often. She wasn't angry, she wasn't distant, not exactly. She was present. Just not with me. One evening I was setting the table, something I always did before dinner, even if we ate in silence. I laid out her favorite bowl. I poured her a glass of ginger water, which she liked with too much ice. And I waited. The clock hit 7:10. Then 8:40. She texted, running behind. Don't wait up. Love you. That was the first night I felt something fracture, but it didn't make a sound. I didn't ask questions. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I already knew the shape of them. I think when you've known someone long enough, you feel the shift before you see it. I began watching her closely, but not with suspicion. With mourning. Like someone who knows autumn has arrived but pretends not to see the leaves falling. She started wearing perfume again. Not the kind I used to buy her, something sharper, more floral, not her usual earthy tones. She dyed her hair. Just a little. Added warmth. Layers. Color. I told myself she just needed to feel new again. But I also noticed how she checked her phone now. Not casually, but deliberately. Screen tilted. Responses typed quickly. Then silence. One night, I still remember the date, February 17th, she came home with a new coat. Bright red. Not her color. Too bold, too loud for someone who lived in neutrals. I said nothing. She slipped it onto the hook by the door, kissed me on the cheek, and walked past. There was a trace of unfamiliar cologne clinging to the fabric. I stood there with my hand still on the back of my neck, staring at that coat. I didn't touch it. I didn't smell it again. I didn't confront her. I just noted it. Like you would a scratch on a table that's always been solid. You don't sand it. You don't varnish it. You just see it. And leave it there. That night, I lay awake and thought, what's the weight of a quiet betrayal? Not the kind that shatters dishes or explodes in arguments. But the kind that creeps in slowly, wearing soft shoes, slipping between moments. The kind that takes away your wife an inch at a time until she's still sitting across from you, but she's not really there anymore. I still cooked dinner. Still asked about her day. Still kissed her goodnight. But part of me quietly, gently started to let go. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. But because I realized, I cannot stop someone from drifting if they've already set sail. And the strangest part? She didn't even notice I had started walking away. She crossed the line slowly. Softly. And when she did, I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just chose silence. But that silence? It was not weakness. It was the beginning of something far more powerful than she imagined. 3 weeks after the red coat, something inside me shifted without permission. It wasn't rage or grief, I think those came later. That day, it was just stillness. A strange calm, like walking into a room and realizing the storm has already passed and taken the walls with it. You stand there, blinking at the space where your life used to be, wondering how long it had been gone. It was a Saturday. Gray light came in through the kitchen window and the radio was playing some old folk song neither of us knew the lyrics to. She was standing at the sink, pouring more cream into her coffee than usual. It was quiet between us, but not because we had fought. We hadn't fought in months. I think that was the real clue. People who care usually argue before they drift apart. We had bypassed all of that. We were just living in separate silences, side by side. She had her phone face down on the counter. That used to mean nothing. Now it meant everything. Her smile was different too, the kind people wear when they're looking forward to something but not the thing they're currently living. She tapped her fingers nervously, looked up at the clock twice in under a minute, then mumbled something about needing to run errands. I just nodded and said, drive safe. That's the thing about people leaving you in pieces, they never expect you to stay composed. I wasn't going to ask where she was going. I wasn't going to follow her. I didn't even watch her walk out the door. I waited for the sound of the engine, the soft click of the garage closing behind her, and then I sat at the table and finally let myself breathe. 10 minutes later, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and left the house too, but not to chase her. I just needed to see the outside world to remind myself that it still existed. I drove to a park she and I used to visit when we first moved to town. It was the kind of place that felt heavy with memory. The bench under the elm tree still had the initials someone else had carved years ago. The pond still held the same lazy ducks, indifferent to the lives unraveling around them. I sat there for nearly an hour wondering how many moments like this I had already missed, the quiet ones that slowly dissolve the foundation beneath you. Maribel had become a mystery to me. And not in the romantic way people talk about in movies. No, this was a mystery you didn't want to solve because the answer would confirm the worst. She was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Or maybe she was revealing who she had been all along and I had just chosen to see the version of her I wanted. It was late afternoon when I got back home. The coat was gone from the hook. Her coffee cup was still in the sink, a soft ring of cream around the edge. I stared at it longer than I should have, then washed it, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Something about that felt final. Like I was putting away a piece of her, one clean surface at a time. She returned that evening around 7. No shopping bags. No stories. She didn't mention where she'd been. Just a kiss on the cheek and a long shower. I made us dinner, roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, simple food. She picked at her plate and smiled with a kind of forced gratitude, the way a stranger might smile if you gave them a gift they didn't ask for. I don't remember what we watched on TV that night. I just remember glancing at her and realizing she wasn't in the room, not really. Her body was there, curled up in her robe, legs tucked under her, the blue light of the screen flickering against her face. But the rest of her was elsewhere. And I was starting to understand, I wasn't meant to follow. She went to bed early and I stayed up late, just sitting on the couch. No TV, no music, just my own thoughts. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt something quieter, the kind of ache that comes when you realize someone you love has already chosen a different life but hasn't told you yet. And worse, they assume you're too blind to see it. That night, I opened the drawer beside the couch where we kept old receipts and mismatched chargers. I reached past the clutter and pulled out a notebook, one I hadn't touched in years. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a single sentence. She thinks I haven't noticed. But I see everything now. Then I closed the book, set it down, and went to bed. I didn't wake her. I didn't ask her why she smiled in her sleep like she was dreaming of someplace far away. I just lay beside her in silence and realized the version of her I loved wasn't here anymore. And the version she had become didn't even look back when I stopped holding on. I started waking up before the sun. Not for any noble reason and not because I was chasing some new version of myself. I just needed silence that didn't feel like waiting. When I sat alone in the kitchen at 5:42 a.m. with the soft rattle of the refrigerator and the occasional crack of the house settling, that quiet felt honest. Unloaded. Neutral. No expectations. She used to love mornings. Maribel used to wake before me, leave tiny folded notes near the coffee maker, always mundane, sometimes sweet. Let's walk to the farmer's market today. Don't forget to check the mailbox. I left you the last muffin. That version of her evaporated so slowly, I didn't realize I was still reaching for something that had already turned to smoke. The coffee pot gurgled to life. I sat with both hands wrapped around my mug and stared at the window. Our backyard looked pale and tired in the half-light. There was a pair of sneakers by the sliding door, hers, dirt on the soles. She'd taken up walking again. That used to be her thing. After dinner, down the block, no phones, just our feet and the occasional laugh about the same old neighbor's ridiculous mailbox shaped like a duck. Now she walked alone. At night. With her headphones in. Always returning more awake than when she left. Not tired, electric. Smiling at nothing in particular. Saying that fresh air is everything, then disappearing upstairs. Maybe she really was walking. Maybe that's all it was. But when you're married to someone long enough, you learn to listen beneath the words. And hers had stopped sounding like home. Later that day, I heard her talking in the hallway, soft voice, laughing, low tones. I stepped out from the bedroom just as she lowered the phone and walked into the bathroom. She didn't see me. She didn't need to. I'd memorized that face. The eyes slightly wider. The curve of her lips not quite shaped like her normal smile. It wasn't meant for me. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anything sharp. Not betrayal. Not fear. Just detachment. Like she was becoming someone I used to know and I was just watching the footage in slow motion, already knowing the ending. That night I made dinner again. She complimented the rosemary I added to the potatoes. told me I was a quiet genius in the kitchen. I smiled. Not because I believed her, but because it felt like watching an actor hit their mark in a scene they've rehearsed 100 times. She asked me what show I wanted to watch. I said nothing. Instead, I asked her if she wanted tea. She said yes. Chamomile, no honey. The same way she always had it, but I had to ask because I suddenly couldn't remember if it had ever really mattered. We sat across from each other, warm mugs in our hands, and for the briefest second, she looked up. Eyes met. The room seemed to exhale. Then she asked me if I'd seen the electric bill. And just like that, the moment dissolved. I nodded. Said I'd paid it. She thanked me. Then we turned our heads away at the same time like strangers on a train who almost made eye contact but decided not to. Later, as we got ready for bed, she reached for her moisturizer and told me she might be out late tomorrow, work drinks. I said okay. She waited for more. An expression. A question. Something. But I'd already stepped into the quiet. And I had no intention of coming back out. I lay beside her in bed, her breathing soft and measured, her back to me. The house hummed around us, familiar, unchanged. But everything had shifted. I could feel it in the pause before she whispered goodnight. I could feel it in the way her hand didn't graze mine beneath the sheets. She hadn't left. Not physically. But some part of her had already packed up and gone. And I finally had stopped pretending I didn't notice. It wasn't the missed calls or the longer showers that did it. It wasn't the clothes that started to feel more curated or the faint traces of citrusy cologne in our hallway when I came home early one afternoon. Those were signals, yes. But they weren't the moment. The moment was a chair. It sat by the front window, an old armchair we bought at a second-hand store when we couldn't afford much else. The fabric was frayed in places. It squeaked when you leaned back too fast. But it was comfortable, familiar. My place for reading. Or thinking. Or just breathing when everything felt too loud. I hadn't used it in weeks. Not because I didn't want to, but because something about that chair had stopped calling me. Like it already knew what I hadn't admitted yet, that I was leaving, even if I hadn't packed a thing. That afternoon, I walked past it like I always did, and for the first time, I noticed something new, her phone charger coiled along the side table. Her sweater draped across the backrest. A mug, hers, balanced carelessly on the windowsill with lipstick I didn't recognize. And in that frozen little corner of our house, I realized something deeply unremarkable and yet shattering in its simplicity. She had taken my chair. Not because she needed it. Not out of malice. But because I wasn't there. And in the absence of me, she had filled the space with someone else's rhythm. It wasn't about the chair. It never is. It was the understanding that I had disappeared long before I ever chose to leave and she hadn't noticed. People think breakups are loud. They picture fights, ultimatums, slammed doors. But mine came quietly, not with an argument, but with a soft thud of reality. I had stopped existing in her world and she had stopped checking if I was still in mine. So I didn't say a word. I just stood there, took one last glance at the room and went to the garage. Not to leave, but to find space that was still mine. I pulled down the old canvas that had been collecting dust since I stopped painting. Back when we first got married, I'd stay up into the night working on abstract skies and crooked rooftops. Maribel would sit on the floor beside me, drinking cheap red wine, tossing out song lyrics and asking me what each brushstroke meant. She said I painted the way she thought. But the paintings stopped when our life became too busy. And she never asked about them again. I set the canvas down, opened the paint box, and found the brushes stiff with time. I cleaned one slowly, took out a half-full tube of deep blue and pressed a line across the page. No shapes. No meaning. Just motion. Just proof that something inside me was still capable of creating, even if it wasn't for her. Later that evening, she came home earlier than usual. She was dressed nicely in heels she hadn't worn in over a year. Her hair had been styled differently, with care, with precision. She wasn't wearing it for me. She walked in, tossed her keys in the bowl by the door, and glanced at the easel. "Oh, I forgot you used to do that," she said, brushing past without stopping. No curiosity. No pause. Just 7 words that told me more than any confrontation ever could. I nodded. Yeah, I guess I forgot too. And that was all. We ate in silence. She scrolled through her phone as she chewed, her fork tapping absent-mindedly against her plate. I watched the way her mouth curved when she smiled at someone on the screen. That smile hadn't belonged to me in a long time. But still, I stayed calm. Not because I was suppressing anything, but because there was nothing left to express. I slept on the couch that night, not in protest. Not to send a message. Just because I didn't want to disturb her. And when I woke up the next morning, early again, I felt a strange sense of clarity. She was still in the house. She was still legally my wife. But in every way that mattered, we had already parted. And somehow I wasn't broken by it. I wasn't even sad. I was simply done. It wasn't one decision. It was 100 small ones. Like choosing not to ask where she was going. Or choosing not to wait for her to come home. Like letting her sleep with the bedroom door closed even though we never used to shut it. We said it made the room feel cut off, like the rest of the house couldn't breathe without it open. Now the door stayed shut and neither of us said why. I began noticing things that had always been there, not because they were new, but because my eyes had changed. The way she left the cap off the toothpaste. The way she rushed through goodbyes like the sentence was a burden. The way she walked faster to the car if she thought I might follow. On a Tuesday, I came home early. Not on purpose. Just a canceled meeting. The house was quiet, shoes by the door, her purse still in the entryway. She hadn't left yet. I took off my coat, didn't make a sound. Her voice came from upstairs. Low. Soft. A tone I hadn't heard in years. It had laughter in it. Youth. Something that used to belong to me but no longer did. I didn't go up. I didn't listen. I just stood in the hallway with one hand resting on the wall like I was steadying something that wasn't shaking yet. She never knew I was there. That night, I sat in the car outside our driveway for nearly an hour. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't avoiding. I just didn't feel like crossing the threshold of a life I was only pretending to be part of. Everything started to feel like performance. My voice, my smile, even my movements. I was playing a man she used to love. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate. I was simply no longer present. And she didn't ask why. We still said good morning. Still texted about groceries. Still shared the space like two strangers waiting for their flights in the same terminal, polite, detached, and completely unaware that the other was about to board a different plane. On Thursday, I packed a small bag. Not with clothes. With notebooks. Old photos. A scarf she knitted me 10 years ago, still smelling faintly of lavender. Not because I planned to leave that day, but because I needed to know that when I did, the most important parts of me weren't going to stay behind. She didn't see the bag. I kept it in the garage. That night, she asked if I wanted to try a new restaurant that opened across town. It was the first time she had initiated anything in weeks. I looked at her face as she asked. She was wearing light makeup. Her hair had been brushed carefully. She looked beautiful. Polished. Removed. I said sure. Dinner was fine. That's all I can say about it. The food was warm. The lights were soft. We talked about nothing, and we were good at it. That was the strange part. We were still so good at pretending we were fine. Two people who once knew each other so deeply now performing closeness with the skill of seasoned actors. At the end of the night, she reached for the check. I let her. It used to be a quiet battle between us, who paid, who insisted, who snuck their card to the waiter first. Now it was easy. Effortless. Cold. On the way home, she hummed along to a song I didn't recognize. I remember thinking, I wonder if the man she's seeing likes that song too. And immediately after that thought came the calmest, strangest feeling I'd had yet. I didn't care. Not in a cruel way. Not in a numb way. But in the way someone feels when they finally stop carrying something that was never really theirs to hold. I looked over at her as she drove. I watched her mouth form the words. I noticed the line between her brows when she concentrated on the road. I noticed the chipped polish on her thumbnail. And it hit me. I could remember everything about her, but I no longer felt included in any of it. It was a memory playing out in real time. I was no longer part of the present. When we got home, she kissed me lightly on the cheek, thanked me for going out with her, and went upstairs. I stood in the hallway, fingers resting lightly on the doorframe, watching the staircase swallow her silhouette. She didn't look back. She never did. And this time, neither did I. There were 3 mornings in a row where she didn't say goodbye. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. There was no slammed door, no storm in her voice. Just the quiet rhythm of shoes on tile, keys in a hand, and the sound of the garage opening as I sat still in the other room. I don't think she noticed. I honestly don't think it occurred to her that we'd said nothing. And that was the part that stayed with me. How easily we could go untouched, unspoken, and unfelt. It made me realize something I hadn't said out loud. Not even to myself. I wasn't being left. I was being forgotten. There's a difference. Being left is something that happens to you. It's a decision, a declaration. It has shape, timing, even cruelty. But being forgotten, that's quieter. It's a slow unthreading of someone's awareness of your place in their world. They don't stop loving you. They just stop noticing that you were there at all. One afternoon, I went into the guest room. We hadn't used it for guests in a long time. The bed was neatly made, untouched. There was a shelf with a few of her books, ones she hadn't read in years. I picked one up and held it, flipping pages without reading. The spine cracked gently under my fingers, like something breaking in soft motion. I lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't fall asleep. I just stayed there. That became a habit. Not to avoid her. Not to punish. Just because that room didn't have any expectations in it. No memories of who we were. No ghosts. Just stillness. Eventually, I started sleeping there without explaining. She didn't ask. Maybe she thought I snored. Maybe she thought I needed space. Maybe she didn't think anything at all. And isn't that something? That your absence can become so normal, it doesn't even need explanation. The funny part is I still did the little things. I filled up the gas in her car. I changed the air filters. I took out the trash on the right days. There's a kind of muscle memory that lingers long after intimacy fades. Your hands keep serving even when your heart has stepped out the door. One night, I caught a glimpse of her through the window as she sat on the back porch. She was on the phone, her voice low, knees pulled up to her chest. She had that soft smile again. Not wide, not forced. The kind you wear when you're talking to someone who listens closely. Someone who asks how your day was and actually means it. And I realized something new. It didn't hurt anymore. That was the strangest part. No jealousy, no ache. I just stood there behind the curtain, hand resting against the wall, and I felt permission to let go, to not chase, to stop performing the part of a husband when I was no longer in the story. I watched her laugh at something, real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in months, and I whispered aloud without meaning to, "I hope he treats you kindly." Then I let the curtain fall and turned away. No one heard it. She didn't know I said it. But saying it aloud mattered more to me than she'll ever understand. It was the moment I knew I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her to come back. Not for closure. Not for explanation. I had already left. Quietly. Completely. And she hadn't even noticed the door was open behind me. I didn't plan to stop using the main bathroom. It just happened. One morning, I brushed my teeth in the kitchen sink. She was still in the shower, the door closed, music playing low. I didn't want to interrupt. The next morning I did the same. And then the morning after that. By the end of the week, I had a new routine, not deliberate, just quieter. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop negotiating space. I stopped reaching for the shared drawer. I stopped needing the light to be on or the towels to be folded my way. I didn't resent it. I just stopped needing to belong in rooms I used to consider mine. One night, I drove to a gas station across town. Not because I needed gas, but because I needed air. The kind that doesn't smell like someone else's shampoo. I sat in my car with the windows cracked and the engine off. A soft rain started. I watched the droplets gather on the windshield and slide slowly down. It felt like a life outside the one I was in. Like the world was still moving and I was sitting still enough to finally see it. I stayed there for over an hour. Didn't listen to music. Didn't call anyone. Just breathed. On the drive home, I took a different route. Passed by an old bookstore we used to love. I slowed down but didn't stop. I didn't feel nostalgic. I didn't feel sad. I just noticed that it was still there, surviving without us, open past 9, lights warm behind the glass. She was asleep when I got home. Or pretending to be. I didn't check. I grabbed a pillow from the linen closet and laid down on the living room floor. The couch was too soft. I needed to feel something firm underneath me. And that's when it occurred to me. I had been more alone in this house with her than I'd ever been on my own. It was a strange kind of relief. Not dramatic. Not sharp. Just clean. I had nothing to prove anymore. No arguments to make. No questions left to ask. She wasn't hiding anything. Not really. She was just living something else, a different version of life, one that didn't include me even though my name was still on the mailbox. And I was already halfway gone. Not running. Not hiding. Just beginning to exist somewhere else. There wasn't a single moment that told me it was the day. No big sign. No sudden fight. Just the way the light moved through the kitchen that morning. Still. Pale. Undemanding. It felt like the world was making room for something new. And this time I didn't hesitate. I poured my coffee black. No noise. No rush. I looked out the window, same view I'd had for years, the fence, the neighbor's garden, the tree that never quite lost all its leaves. I realized I'd memorized this scene, not because I loved it, but because I'd been afraid to leave it. Familiarity can feel like safety until you understand it's only a habit. I walked upstairs slowly past the closed bedroom door. She was still asleep or pretending. It didn't matter. We hadn't spoken much that week. Nothing cold, just distance wrapped in politeness. A mutual fading. In the guest room, I picked up the small duffel I'd quietly packed a week before. It wasn't heavy. Just clothes, my notebooks, a couple of photos, one of my late father, one of me and my brother at a lake, and one of her, taken years ago, back when her eyes still searched for mine in a room. I paused there, hand resting on the doorknob. Not to change my mind. Just to breathe in the last moment I'd ever be someone's husband in this house. I left a note on the counter. Nothing dramatic. No guilt. No bitterness. You didn't lose me. I simply stepped back far enough to see myself again. I wish you peace, and I mean that. No signature. She'd know. I drove without music. Just the hum of the road and the soft rhythm of rain beginning to tap against the windshield again, like it had in the gas station parking lot weeks before. Back when I realized I was still alive beneath everything. I didn't go far. Just to a small rental near the coast. 1 bedroom. Quiet street. A porch that creaked when you stepped on the third board. I unpacked slowly. Hung my jackets on proper hangers. Put the photos on the shelf above the desk. Made the bed. And when I finished, I sat by the window as the sky began to clear, a thin stretch of light cutting through the clouds, opening just enough space for the possibility of warmth. And I felt it. Not relief. Not triumph. Just the soft, undeniable return of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, myself. I made tea. Not because she drank it. Because I remembered I liked it. Sat on the porch. Listened to nothing. And smiled. Not because I'd escaped. Because I'd chosen. And that made all the difference.